So this concept of purity that was brought up in the video at the very opening is a concept that may be foreign to many of us, or at least something that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. But it's something that the Bible promotes over and over and over again. And in order to understand what it means to seek to live in purity, it's, I think, centrally important to understand how sin works. In Mark chapter 7, I believe it begins with verse 14, Jesus talks about how sin works in our lives. He says the sinful things we do, the things that are not pleasing to God, the thoughts, the words, the actions that pour forth from us, they all come from a heart that is tainted. It's impure. It's sin that really, what it does is it turns us inward, and it draws our attention, or draws my attention purely on myself. And I don't know about you, but I found in my own experience in life, the more and more I focus on myself, the more chaotic life can be, and the more and more just bad things just bubble to the surface. And it doesn't just affect me, it affects other people. And the reason, so an impure heart is a heart that's been tainted by sin, that's turned inward. And by contrast, a pure heart will be a heart that is reflecting God, who himself, by definition, is pure and holy, okay? God is the standard bearer. He is everything we are not, okay? He's the creator of this world. He put order in this world, and we are called to have our hearts centered on him, and everything in our lives are to flow forth from a relationship with him, okay? Now, I think it's good for us to take a look at the first two verses in the reading for today, because it kind of gives us a picture of what this might look like. It just says, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. So the idea is, the assumption here in this verse is that we have a relationship with God. We are his children, and so we're called to imitate our Father, as many of us have imitated our own parents. And fleshing this out a bit more, to walk in love as Christ loved us, okay? So we're called to live life with a heart that is centered on God, not on me and what I want, okay? Now here's the problem. I think there's two ways that we can sometimes find ourselves looking at that call. First, I don't know about you, but I get frustrated with my life sometimes because I feel like I fall into the same patterns. Sometimes I give into the same sins over and over and over again, and it comes from a heart that is anything but pure. And because we know, the Bible teaches us that this side of heaven we will never be perfectly pure. We are sinners, we are broken, we are fallen, and because of that, it might be tempting as a Christian to say, I've been forgiven, so who cares? I'll just do the best I can, and then, I'm not going to really focus on this purity thing. And that's one of the reasons sometimes we don't talk as much about purity, because when we talk about purity, we're talking about what we do, what's flowing out of us. And we know that Christianity, our faith, is centered first and foremost on what God has done for us. But you see what we do sometimes? We say, okay, Jesus has done everything, and so, and so we don't put a lot of effort into that whole concept of purity and how we don't even know what that means to even pursue such a life. So that's one struggle we might have as Christians. The other struggle is we look at the culture around us, and it's so attractive. It's so attractive, and it encourages us to live a life of impurity, and it says, you see that God who is holy and perfect? You don't need him, because he tells you to be a fuddy-duddy. He tells you to be lame and to have no fun, and so the culture says, pushes God out of the picture, and you see this really is the problem that we have in the church today. This summer we've talked about how more and more the culture that we live in, it's having a greater and greater impact on us, on the church, rather than the church having a impact on the culture, and us as Christians actively seeking to have a greater impact on the culture. And one of the problems we face in the world today is more and more and more we're just being encouraged to give in to licentiousness, just give in to living any old way we want and making excuses for it, justifying it and saying, well, it's okay because I have faith so I can do anything I want. And it just seeps into the pews, and it finds its way into our relationships. And because we are so narrowly focused, it has this great impact oftentimes in generations to come. And it's a scary prospect for the church. Now, you don't misunderstand me here. We've always struggled with sin. The world has always been a place where, it's tempting to give in to what I want, okay? It's tempting to live the way I feel I should be able to live, okay? But what's changing in our culture is more and more you're seeing in media and in common practice and things that are being seen as acceptable behavior. You're seeing it more and more promoted, okay, in our society, whereas before it was kind of, held to the side to a certain degree. I'm guessing some of you here today can probably remember TV shows growing up where, family was seen as a good thing, and people in general were seen as people who shouldn't be thinking about me first, but should be looking to serve other people. It went so far as, married couples sometimes would sleep in separate beds on TV shows, right? And you wouldn't dare have any sort of foul language or anything like that in a TV show. It would be bleeped. I mean, I remember some of the family networks, they actually would bleep out words, and now you're seeing more and more of these words starting just being left on television. It's just seen as acceptable. I remember even as a kid myself, I guess that some of you probably remember watching The Cosby Show. And, today, it's more and more things have come out about Bill Cosby, which are sad, but it doesn't change the fact that show actually had a positive influence. It encouraged a positive way of looking at family and relationships. Marriage is a good thing. We're here to serve one another and love one another. And in half the episodes, the reasons there would be conflict is because one of them was only thinking about themselves and nobody else. And you see, in many ways, that piggybacked off what you would have heard on Sunday in church. There are other shows I could think of too, and I'm sure you can think of some as well. But think of the television landscape today as an example. Think of one sitcom that doesn't revolve around some form of vulgarity. Think of one sitcom that you'd say that you'd be okay with letting your kids watch. I can't think of one. Maybe you can think of one. I can't think of one because more and more and more these shows are revolving around impure behavior, making a joke of it, and even encouraging it. And I know that some of us watch some of these cable television shows, some of these really popular cable television shows, and they just stick things on the screen in not a way that's actually going to further the plot or actually have purpose, but it's just there for shock value. If you've watched shows on like HBO or some of these other cable channels, I understand, like some of these shows, they have the plot can be intriguing, but what they do is they throw things out there, they put language out there, they put images on the screen, and it's just there to set that show apart. And the more and more we watch these things, the more and more we begin to see those things as acceptable. I was hanging out with a fifth grader this past week. I went to a servant event at a camp, and he told me that one of his favorite things to do was play video games. I wasn't shocked. And do you know what his favorite video game right now is? He said it was Mortal Kombat, the latest version of it. And if all you gotta do is go to YouTube and watch the latest version, and I'm telling you, it's like people mutilating each other. I mean, it's like super violent, bloody, gory. And I'm like, are your parents okay with this? He's like, oh yeah, they love it, I went on to find out that his father also liked video games. So it's like, so the whole idea is that if it feels good, if it's serving me, it's okay. You can play video games today, and I've talked to some of our youth about this. I know they play this, a game called Grand Theft Auto 5 came out not a little while ago. It's kind of old news now, but they play this game. You get to be a character in an open world. You can go wherever you want to. You can do anything you want to, including engaging in rather disturbing behaviors. And in some cases, it's actually encouraged in the game. But what do? We justify playing this game because why? It's fun. And it's not real. It's not hurting anybody. And so we justify it. After all, the gamer has a choice, right? So it's okay that we created this game and included active participation in sinful behavior as a part of the game. Do y'all see what I'm kind of getting at here? What does that do to us? What does that way at looking at the world and other people do to us? Up here it says consumer-driven relationships, and I would say that we've been it's been built into us that life itself is consumer driven. It's all about me, okay? And so you put that image on the screen and that person is serving me. You can put inappropriate images on a computer with a click of a mouse, and that person on that screen is serving me, is worshiping me. I can open up a video game, do anything I want, manipulate the environment around me, and it's all about me. And on top of all of this, we start to encourage one another to do things that serve me first. Why shouldn't I get married before we're living together? Well, because I'm afraid to make a promise, a commitment, because it's about first me finding security before doing the right thing. Why should I watch my language? Well, I have the right to say anything I want to say, right? What is our starting point? This stuff seeps its way. We pretend it's not there. We're numb to it, and this stuff comes home. And kids start to walk around and act like mommy and daddy exist to serve me. Look, I called you, Mom. I called you, Dad, and you weren't there. You're supposed to pick me up. You're supposed to give me a ride. You were doing something else. I have things to do. You want me to mow the lawn? You take out the garbage. I just have to finish the level first on this game. You know what I mean? It's like, this is, and parents, I know a lot of you, it's like irritating, but think about this. What kind of attitude do we have as in our own relationships as a couple? We do the same thing because we look at our spouse or we look at our friends, and what we do is we look at them and the attitude is based on this. What have you done for me lately? That's what the relationship is about. Well, they did something good for me, so I guess I got to do something good for them now. Or I'm really frustrated with you because it's not based on love and first and foremost seeking the greater good of another person. And these relationships that we have are not centrally built on a relationship with God. Instead, we just kind of say, we can live any way we want. And all of this junk just funnels its way into our lives, and parents, grandparents, it just funnels into the way we look at our children and interact with them as well, What do they want to do? They want to be in 1,000 sports. They want to be in all these activities, which can be good in and of themselves, but what we do is we minimize a relationship with God. We minimize purity and understanding that life is so much bigger than me and you. See? We minimize and we just justify, letting our kids run our schedules. And what does it teach them? It teaches them what's at the center of the universe. Me. Jesus defined that as impurity. What is going to flow from a heart that is centered on me? I think it's good that since I'm kind of hammering some of this kind of hard right now, it's probably good for me to have a little confession myself here. So I'm going to go for it. This past week, I went to Camp Concordia. It's a day camp. Western part of the state. If you have elementary age kids, I'd encourage you to check it out. They have great camps for the summer, and they're trying to build this camp up. Went with some youth, myself, and the idea is we're gonna serve the camp itself by painting some cabins. We're gonna build a big shed that they can put equipment in, and we're also going to help lead a day camp basically during the week with some kids that were going to be coming. Now, some of you might have remembered last week I wasn't feeling so hot. I'll tell you that if your throat really feels bad and you think you might have strep throat, go to the doctor. Don't just say, I'm a man, I can handle it. It's not a good idea. I wasn't using the common sense God gave me. And so I got sick, and it poured over into Monday. I felt like needles were in my throat. And finally, I got some medication, was feeling better. And Tuesday I went off I finally met up with the group. They'd already taken off, okay? And I got there, and I'll be honest, I was tired. I was worn out. And Megan will be the first, my wife will be the first to tell you that to get me cranky and to get me to really get my sinful nature going, just get me tired or don't feed me. That's what happens. All right? And so I got to the camp, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to fit in. What am I supposed to do? I'm an adult. Who am I going to supervise? And one of the leaders there, the woman who's overseeing the day camp part, comes up to me and she's like, "We need another buddy." You know what a buddy is? They pair you up with a little kid, and you get to hang out with them for the week. Now, what she was asking me to be a 35-year-old buddy with a bunch of other 14-year-old buddies, so I'd be like the adult, walking around with this kid. I'm tired, I'm worn out, and the first thing I said was, okay, And one of the kids is like, yeah, man, you got a lot of energy for this. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm ready to go, And this is what happened. I mean, over the course of the day, I got paired up with this fifth grader, and I was so worn out. And I was watching the other kids, and they had little 5-year-olds like hanging around their necks, grabbing around the leg, and they're like, why won't they listen to us? And I'm just sitting there going, ha, now you know. Now you know what it's like to live, as an adult, with responsibility. And I was so tired that during that day, I was ashamed of myself, because many times I found myself just kind of hanging back and I'll watch my fifth grader. I'll do what I've called to do, but, I'm not going to try and encourage them or anything. I'm just so tired. And you see, what I was seeing in them was my own behavior sometimes with my own kids. Why won't they just do what I want them to do? Come on, and I was seeing that reflection in them, and I was getting pleasure out of seeing other people getting frustrated, and instead, yeah, and admit it, we sometimes get, but instead of having a heart of purity and an attitude towards this, that, what? I have the opportunity to bless. I got completely focused on myself. And this is exactly the attitude that we have in our culture. The reason I have a picture of a kid up there like this is because this is what society, what our culture promotes, and what our church is constantly fighting against. Me, I want. If you feel it, do it. It's seeping its way into our politics today. If you feel it's good, then do it. If it's serving you, then do it, because life is all about you. This world is a playground, so live any old way you want, and purity, who cares? You only live once, live now. Doesn't that sound childish? We get tough on our kids that you need to behave the way I want. Meanwhile, I'm off here doing anything the way I want and saying, God doesn't matter. Who needs a holy God? Because I get to play God in this society, in this world that we live in. And this is what's amazing when we think about this, when we think about how we just engage, and I'm the chief of sinners on this, engage in this attitude of everything's about me and it's all about me getting served. God sees all this. He knows all this, and this holy God who's perfect and completely other than us. Can you imagine how pathetic that looks from his perspective? And yet he looks at us and looks at you and sees that heart of yours, that you're just indulging, and he loves you. I think about this sometimes, and this is what I found myself meditating on. When I'm starting to give into the chaos and this horizontal realm, these relationships that we live with one another, and the chaos of this world starts to get crazy, where does God want us to set our eyes? Right there. Because the cross is raised up high above the chaos. And it calms our storms, brings peace to rather troublesome situations, and reminds us that God is the one who purifies our hearts by the blood of Jesus. Love, focus outward. Jesus, loving you, exposes the self-centered, me-centered way we oftentimes look at the world, the impure way that we look at everything. See? And so focusing rather on my rather chaotic feelings and my crankiness, I need food, all this, instead focusing on truth. That God loves me, and that through a relationship with him, I can actively seek to live a life of purity. No, I'll never be perfect, but that doesn't give me an excuse. The cross is not an excuse to live any old way I want. It's a call to live a life of purity. And so then when we look and we see a God who is holy. The Bible talks about this over and over and over. God is holy, holy, holy. He is perfect. He is pure. We can understand when we look at a God who is holy and pure, that is a God calling me to maturity. Not to give into my childish nature. Me first, I look to God, and he's calling me to be raised up above the crowd, if you will. To be raised up and see that I have a higher calling than just serving myself. And when I see that, I can begin to recognize that God's design for this world is good. In Genesis chapter 1, we recognize that God created human beings. Genesis chapter 2, we recognize that God called human beings to be in relationship with one another. Creation itself was not good until people were in relationship, all right? But do you understand that, that was the one time. That was the one time that God said, it is not good. And he created Eve for Adam. And so when they were in relationship, that's when creation itself was good. But do you recognize that our relationships with one another, it's not divorced from a relationship with God? You see, the idea was God was perfect and holy, and he loved creation. He poured himself into creation, including us, and we were called to reflect him in our relationships with others, seeking to love outwardly, seeking the greatest good of others, in purity, in hearts that were connected to God. But what we do is we say, God, I don't need you, and we're just going to kind of figure it out on our own. And that's a recipe for disaster. I'm guessing we all have cars in this room. What happens when you take a car and you refuse to take it to the shop? It's going to fall apart, right? But that's what we do. We say, I know I have a designer, just like that car has a designer, but I'm going to handle it the way I want to. That never works out. It never works out, and it leads to chaos, and that's exactly what we oftentimes see in this world. In Ephesians 5:7-8, it says, at one time you were walking in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. When we're in the midst of it, just kind of trying to make everything work, it's easy to lose sight of truth. But when we speak truth to one another, when we focus on God's truth, and when we speak truth to one another, things oftentimes work out in much better ways. God keeps our eyes focused on the big picture, not just the narrow. When I was at that day camp, it was a blessing for me to actually see one of our youth offered to be a lifeguard, to serve as a lifeguard. And during that time, she noticed that a bunch of the other youth were not around their buddy. The kids were playing, and while the other teenagers were actually other places. Easy thing for her would have been to just do nothing. But instead what she did was she blew the whistle and called them out on it, said, everybody get by your buddies. She did it once. Person did it for 5 seconds, went away again. And a few minutes later, she did the same thing. That was brave. That was coming from a heart of what's right, what is good, seeking the greatest good of the other, because you know what? She could have brought on some unpleasant things from others, but yet she stood up and she did what was right. You see, when we seek to live in purity, when our hearts have been purified by Christ, and when we look at the culture around us and we see it for what it is, and we see the poison around us, we can begin to see how truly blessed we can be in the long run when we seek to live lives of purity. Our kids, where do you want them to be in 20 years? Now, I'm not talking about like if you want them to be starting on the team next week. Where do you want them to be in 20 years? What do you want to be the foundation for their lives? What do you want to be the foundation for your marriage? What do you want to be the foundation for your life? What's true? Where's your starting point? The Bible teaches us that it starts with God. He gets our attention by hanging there on that cross and reminding you that you can start over today. But then he also pushes us forward, reminding us that the life we're called to live is a good life. And as a church, we get to live that life together. One of the constant struggles people have is, maybe you kind of have, do you ever feel like you have that roller coaster, like this week I'm doing pretty good, but man, this week, it's a rough one, you kind of get tossed around by life. How can I keep evil at bay? I'm never going to be perfect this side of heaven, but how can I keep my eyes focused where I need to be focused? This is why spiritual practices are so important. This is why both us pastors hammer you over and over and over and over again about being in worship and prioritizing that, because that's laying a foundation for the big picture, not just for you, but for your children. And think about this, your children's children. You want to leave a legacy? That's the greatest way you can do it. Getting into the Word and understanding what truth is, immersing yourself in that truth, it has a deep impact on your life. What do you do every single day? Do you wake up and the first thing and say, what do I need to do? How am I going to serve myself? What do I have to do? Or do you start by saying, what does God have to say to me? Are you regularly in the Word? Are you praying to God? Are you speaking to Him? That's what a relationship looks like. Actively speaking to God. Are you praying together as couples? Are you praying with your friends? Are you coming to church? All these things together. Consistency is important. Because as soon as we start to let other things creep in, what happens? Where do we start to set our eyes? Not there, but here. And that's when the insecurities creep in. And that's when life can get kind of ugly. Brothers and sisters in Christ, life itself is not easy. But God is with you. He loves you. And He is calling you to have an active relationship with Him, to see who He is, and allow that relationship with Him to flow into your relationship with other people, and to live a life like no other. May we do so as we together, as a church, set our eyes on the cross for Jesus' sake. Amen.